Hello, my name is Nigel Thorne, and I am concerned about the influence of an academic theory, queer theory, on children's education in Wales. By and large, British people have shared some common social values over the years. The truth is important. The duty of the parent is to protect their child from teaching that they deem to be harmful. Adolescence is, after all, a time of exploration and risk-taking. Parents have a duty of care. Now, this value is reinforced by Article 5 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, where it states, "States parties shall respect the responsibilities, rights and duties of parents or, where applicable, the members of the extended family or community, as provided for by local custom, legal guardians or other persons legally responsible for the child, to provide, in a manner consistent with the evolving capacities of the child, appropriate direction and guidance in the exercise by the child of the rights recognised in the present convention." The third value that was commonly accepted is that coercing parents into accepting teaching that they believe is harmful to their child is wrong. New academic theorists do not share these values. They come from a very different place. They see the world as being created through power. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? And they devise strategies to undermine power structures and social taboos. The Relationships and Sexuality Education Code guidance and associated educational material has been developed by Professor E.J. Renold from Cardiff University and Ester McGeeney from the University of Sussex. In her 2007 paper, Girls, Boys and Junior Sexualities, Professor Renold wrote, "Queering childhood involves not just the queering of sex and gender and sexual binary oppositions such as male, masculinity, female, femininity, and heterosexual, homosexual, but also the generational binaries, adult-child. Queer theorists believe that binary oppositions are inherently harmful, as one pole of the binary oppresses the other. The goal of the queer theorist is to dissolve the binary oppositions by whatever means necessary. So people are told that the truth is flexible. In previous videos, I demonstrated how Professor Renold, inspired by the work of American academic Judith Butler, had queered the sex and gender binary oppositions within the RSE code and guidance and supporting educational materials by downplaying the significance of biological sex and elevating the significance of a personal gender, a gender identity. Parental authority is undermined by a massive focus on empowering children and giving them agency. Queer theorists believe that the adult-child binary opposition is harmful because adults suppress children. Parents are adults. Queer theory is a direct attack on parental authority. Indeed, references to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child are made as a justification for removing the parental rights to withdraw a child from RSE.
Schools and people who set curriculums are very experienced people, and they have the knowledge and the understanding and the skills to teach young people in a way that is appropriate to them and that will be accessible and inclusive to all. In no other part of the curriculum do we allow parents to withdraw young people from education that is evidence-based, education that is facts-based, and education that we have proven that they have a right to access through things like the Covenant on Children's Rights from the UN.
Parents must accept state teaching even if they deem it to be harmful.
This is one a common question that seems to be rising now. Does relationships and sexuality education need to be mandatory for every child? I think, Craig, maybe you're the best person to come in for us on that, please.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the simple answer to that question is yes.
In this video, I'll be looking at how Professor Renold and Ester McGeeney are querying the adult-child binary opposition and looking at another huge figure in the development of queer theory, Michel Foucault. E.J. Renold, Ester McGeeney and the current wave of external educational providers share an extreme libertarian attitude that was born as a reactionary movement to a perceived moral authoritarianism. That perceived moral authoritarianism is most evident in the teachings of the Catholic Church. The Church puts great store on the importance of the family unit. To reinforce the family unit, the Church teaches that sexual activity outside of marriage is sinful. This has been problematic for many children brought up as Catholics, particularly those who are same-sex attracted, because it has instilled a sense of shame. We are, after all, sexual beings. Now, the Church itself lost a good deal of moral authority following the revelations of a number of cases of child sexual abuse by priests. Such feelings of shame were experienced by the grandfather of queer theory, Michel Foucault, an anarcho-Marxist philosopher whose experience led him to write critiques of modern society.
Michel Foucault was a French 20th century philosopher and historian who spent his career forensically criticising the power of the modern bourgeois capitalist state, including its police, law courts, prisons, doctors and psychiatrists. His goal was to work out nothing less than how power worked and then to change it in the direction of a Marxist anarchist utopia. Though he spent most of his life in libraries and seminar rooms, he was a committedly revolutionary figure. He met with enormous popularity in elite Parisian intellectual circles. Jean-Paul Sartre admired him deeply, and he still maintains a wide following among young people studying at university in the prosperous corners of the world. His background, which he was extremely reluctant ever to talk about and tried to prevent journalists from investigating at all costs, was very privileged. Both his parents were inordinately rich, coming from a long line of successful surgeons in Poitiers in west-central France. His father, Dr. Paul Foucault, came to represent all that Michel would hate about bourgeois France. Michel had a standard upper-class education. He went to elite Jesuit institutions, was an altar boy, and his parents hoped he would become a doctor. But Michel wasn't quite like other boys. He started self-harming and thinking constantly of suicide. At university, he decorated his bedroom with images of torture by Goya. When he was 22, he tried to commit suicide and was forced by his father, against his will, to see France's most famous psychiatrist, Jean Delay, at the Hôpital Sainte-Anne in Paris. The doctor wisely diagnosed that a lot of Michel's distress came from having to keep his homosexuality, and in particular his interest in extreme sadomasochism, away from a censorious society. Gradually, Foucault entered the underground gay scene in France, fell in love with a drug dealer, and then took up with a transvestite. For long periods in his 20s, he went to live abroad in Sweden, Poland and Germany, where he felt his sexuality would be less constrained. All the while, Foucault was progressing up the French academic ladder. The seismic event of his intellectual life came in the summer of 1953, when Foucault was 27 and on holiday with a lover in Italy. There he came across Nietzsche's book Untimely Meditations, which contains an essay called On the Uses and Abuses of History for Life. In the essay, Nietzsche argued that academics had poisoned our sense of how history should be read and taught. They made it seem as if one should read history in some sort of a disinterested way in order to learn how it all was in the past. But Nietzsche rejected this with sarcastic fury. There was no point learning about the past for its own sake. The only reason to read and study history is to dig out from the past ideas, concepts and examples which can help us to lead a better life in our own times. This essay liberated Foucault intellectually as nothing had till then. Immediately, he changed the direction of his work and decided to become a particular kind of philosophical historian, someone who could look back into the past to help to sort out the urgent issues of his own time.
Foucault's last work was The History of Sexuality, where he wrote about how to increase the pleasure of sex.
The manoeuvres he performed in relation to sex are again very familiar. Foucault rebelled against the view that we're all now deeply liberated and at ease with sex. He argued that since the 18th century, we have relentlessly medicalized sex, handing it over to professional sex researchers and scientists. We live in an age of what Foucault called scientia sexualis, science of sexuality. But Foucault looked back with considerable nostalgia to the cultures of Rome, China and Japan, where he detected the rule of what he called an ars erotica, erotic art, where the whole focus was on how to increase the pleasure of sex rather than merely understand and label it. Once again, modernity was blamed for pretending there'd been progress when there was in fact just a loss of spontaneity and imagination.
In an article titled Michel Foucault, the Prophet of Pederasty, Daniel Johnson writes, by 1968, Foucault no longer wanted to push the boundaries, but to abolish them, advocating the normalisation not just of gay subcultures, but of sadomasochism and pederasty. Foucault's calculated affront to bourgeois morality symbolised his rejection of Western civilization, tout court, a rejection that included not only Christianity, but its Enlightenment critics. Power was the only reality behind these facades, a power that was all the more insidious for being unconsciously self-imposed by societies that had been internalising the Augustinian moral code since the end of the ancient world. In an article entitled Michel Foucault and Other Progressive Intellectual Heroes Were Pedophiles, S.G. Chair writes, at the root of postmodernism lies the subjectivity of values. Nothing is subjectively right or wrong. Human morality is merely a social construct. And since society's moral standards are merely constructed by the status quo, it's imperative that we deconstruct social structures. This movement is known as post-structuralism or deconstructionist in academic circles. Transgressing moral norms. This is how the postmodernist thinks. Since everything is subjective to a person's experience, feelings and consciousness, then nothing can be objectively sacred. Childhood innocence, for example, is just a social construct. Since different people have different opinions about childhood sexuality, who are we to judge what's right or wrong? But worse than just being ambiguous about cultural standards is how the postmodernist deconstructionist movement is actually promoting the destruction of universally accepted values. They see this as challenging the hegemony of power. Because the dominant hegemony of society's sexual morality lies in traditional patriarchal values, these radical intellectuals believe that sexual desires can be utilised as a revolutionary force in politics. Postmodernist ideas can be found in the works of E.J. Renold, the person responsible for developing the RSE code guidance and associated educational materials in Wales. In an article titled They Won't Let Us Play Unless You're Going Out With One of Them, under a section titled Queering Innocence, Renold writes, modern childhood, specifically pre-teenage childhood, is often represented as a time of presumed sexual innocence. Tracking the historical construction of childhood innocence in industrialised societies over the past century, and the progressive rules and regulations paradoxically cleansing and denying children's sexuality, Christine Piper suggests that little has changed. The child and sexuality not only continue to be presented as oppositional and incompatible, but unthinkable when it comes to children of primary school age, 4 to 11 years old. In the cross-cutting themes for designing your curriculum page on the Hub website, there is a section on enabling human rights, where it states, schools and settings should discuss RSE in the context of children's rights, as protected by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. A rights-based approach supported by equity should be embedded in the learning. Equity means prioritising the category of individuals that are perceived to have less power over the category of individuals that are perceived to have more. The Children's Commissioner has published a guide for schools, The Right Way, a children's rights approach for education in Wales. This should inform how settings embed a rights-based approach in the curriculum, including RSE. Rights provide learners with a way of exploring RSE issues, helping them to develop the foundational skills for healthy relationships, respect and understanding of others, and to recognise healthy and harmful behaviours. Now, although referencing the conventions on the rights of the child, both the guidance and the document written by the Children's Commissioner makes no reference to Article 5 of the Convention and the parental responsibility to shield their child from material that they perceive to be harmful to the child's development. In the summer of 2022, there was a CSC Curriculum for Wales virtual summer conference organised by the Central South Consortium, an organisation set up to support schools in the local authority areas of Bridgend, Cardiff, Merthyr, Rhondda Cynon Taf and Vale of Glamorgan. One of the keynote presentations was provided by Professor E.J. Renold, Keynote 4, Transforming Relationships and Sexuality Education in Wales. In the presentation, Professor Renold signposted teachers to a resource she created named Crush.
But I just wanted to share with you the resources and the resource base, the evidence resource base that we have been kind of creating over the years. So some of the case studies, like making RSE webs, there are many more school case studies of getting started inside the Crush resource. So the Crush resource is a resource for practitioners. It shares our journey of professional learning with examples moving forward and resources such as like, how do I begin on a whole school approach to RSE? How do I map across all 6 AOLEs to ensure that the strand is explored across in a cross-curricular way, and other resources as well about different organisations that can support you moving forward. So the Crush resource is an evolving resource. We are currently in the process of updating that resource in alignment with the new RSE code, including work on the 3 strands, and look at the Crush resource for something more bespoke for Wales that reflects and shares how we are working with teachers on their journey to prepare for the new statutory Relationships and Sexuality education.
One of the example activity guides recommended within Crush is Great Relationships and Sex Education by Alice Hoyle and Ester McGeeney. Ester McGeeney talks about her favourite chapter within this book.
I think my favourite chapter, if I'm allowed that, is our chapter on bodies. And I think I really love some of our activities about really helping young people understand their bodies and how they respond to things like arousal or desire in a way that is really safe. We've got a really nice activity that just gets young people to start thinking about, like, to draw a body map of, like, draw around a body or draw a big body and then think about where on the body it feels nice to be touched and how does that feel. So, for example, having your head stroked, and that might feel relaxing. And so just trying to kind of develop that vocabulary for talking about nice touch, pleasurable touch, and then also like allowing young people to talk about like different sexual practices if that's what they want to talk about, and then you can really use that as a way into kind of talking about pleasure and the body, and that's a really nice one.
Within the RSE code, children can be taught about pleasurable activities from age 11. Many parents and teachers may think it inappropriate to talk to children about their feelings of sexual arousal in front of adults. Why is this being done? In 2013, Ester McGeeney presented a paper for a degree in the Doctorate of Philosophy. The paper was called What is Good Sex? Young People's Sexual Pleasure and Sexual Health Services. The work was co-funded by Brook and the Open University and, drawing on data provided by young people, argues for the teaching of pleasure as part of a relationships and sexuality education. The paper references Michel Foucault 13 times. McGeeney writes, in their study of young people's sexual values, Sue Sharp and Rachel Thompson note that with the decline of traditional value systems and institutions such as marriage and the church, there has been a pluralization of authorities on sexuality and a proliferation of sexual voices and narratives. This means that there is no single moral authority that shapes young people's views about what counts as good or legitimate sex, but rather a range of competing discourses or regimes which provide a framework for legitimating sex and within which distinctions between good sex and bad sex can be made. McGeeney is supportive of greater sexual freedom. She writes, "This research, made possible by the long, uneven and unfinished sexual revolution, contributes to these debates exploring how meanings of good sex are produced, contested and embedded within the sexual culture of my participants." There's a belief underlying McGeeney's paper that there is no such thing as inappropriate sex as long as it is consensual. She writes, "There are a number of compelling arguments as to why sexual pleasure should be included and prioritised in the delivery of sexual health services for young people. Broadly, these arguments suggest that foregrounding the emotional and physical pleasures of sex and relationships and grounding youth sexual health initiatives in positive, holistics and rights-based models of sexuality increase young people's capacity to have safe, enjoyable and consensual sexual experiences." Michel Foucault argued in favour of legalising sex between adults and children, and in 1978 was involved in a radio broadcast with fellow intellectuals Guy Hocquenham and John Danet. During the broadcast, Hocquenham talked about sexual consent with children. He said, "As far as this question of consent is concerned, I prefer the terms used by Michel Foucault. Listen to what the child says and give it a certain credence. This notion of consent is a trap in any case. What is sure is that the legal form of an intersexual consent is nonsense. No one signs a contract before making love. When we say that children are consenting in these cases, all we intend to say is this. In any case, there was no violence or organised manipulation in order to wrench out of them affective or erotic relations. In Hocquenham's eyes, consent simply means no violence or organised manipulation. In complete contrast to the teaching of the Catholic Church that sees sex as a wholesome part of a marriage relationship, McGeeney sees good sex as being completely independent of wider psychological and social concerns and obligations. In the Crush resource, there is a section titled Online Training and Resources for Practitioners. Within this section, there is a link to self-reflection exercises produced by Do RSE for schools. The document link is no longer working, but the document can be retrieved from archive. The resource was sponsored by Durex and approved by, among other organisations, Brook. The resource aims to desensitise RSE practitioners to suggestions from pupils as to what they would like to discuss. Under a section called Hot Topics, it states, "Reflect on these topics for yourself. Below are some examples, but you might want to think of some others. If you can find someone who would like to chat about this with you, that would be really useful too." On a training course, this kind of activity may take an hour to an hour and a half, so perhaps give yourself at least half an hour to think about these. Abortion, how do you feel about this? Mutually agreed sex under 16, but over 13. Sex work, e.g. being paid to have sex. Stripping, webcamming. Equal marriage, that any gender can marry any other. Having more than one partner. From dating more than one person to loving more than one person. Porn and sexually explicit media, e.g. internet porn, erotica, sex cable channels. Teenage pregnancy, how do you feel about this? Sex without love, casual sex and hookups. For each one, can you consider whether particularly strong feelings come up? Where these feelings might come from? How might these feelings affect how you're likely to teach these topics? And which of these might need strategies to ensure you can teach them in a non-judgmental way? Traditionally, teachers have been critical of those behaviours that they deem incompatible with a healthy psychosocial development. In contrast, queer theory normalises everything. Absolutely nothing is intrinsically, psychologically or socially unhealthy. What is damaging is the taboo associated with the behaviour. RSE practitioners are expected to treat every behaviour as morally neutral. Once the teacher has been desensitised, he or she is free to deliver RSE training as part of an RSE audit, classroom-based sessions designed to determine what a child wants to be discussed within a safe, non-judgmental space. Within the online training and resources for practitioners section in Crush, there is a link to the Brook's website. Under my courses, Introduction to RSE, there are a number of links to resources created by Professor Renold, including Unboxing RSE, a creative audit to find out what and how young people want to learn about RSE. This is a video demonstrating how children asked what they want to be discussed as part of RSE. I have edited the video slightly to highlight some things that may be controversial, but pupils may bring up anything for discussion. Many people believe that practices such as anal sex and BDSM, kink, can be harmful for young people. Influential people in the Welsh Government appear to believe that empowering a child and giving them agency, even in areas that a parent may believe is harmful to the child, is progressive.
I believe RSE is a child's right, which is why I'm so pleased that the Senedd enshrined that right in law through the Curriculum and Assessment Wales Bill that we passed shortly before the Senedd elections. Empowering children and giving them agency in their lives is crucial for their well-being. RSE really is children's rights in action.
As Helen Saxby in The Critic writes, the buzzwords of the moment, agency and empowerment, are being misappropriated by people whose interests lie in dismantling rules, regulations and boundaries. Activists promote an RSE curriculum to children at school that assumes they are robust enough to be exposed to extreme kink and gender identity ideology in the service of queering the curriculum, But at the same time, they insist that students at universities are so fragile that they need to be protected from the dangers of listening to middle-aged women talk about sex and gender. Queer theorists like Professor Renold believe that dissolving the boundaries between binary oppositions is socially good.
And it's a resource and a creative and ethical praxis that's having a significant international reach in the field of RSE, from Finland to Australia. But it started and it has become embedded here in Wales.
In the summer of 2022, at the Central South Consortium Curriculum for Wales Virtual Summer Conference, E.J. Renold and Ester McGeeney were described as the experts that schools should refer to.
So we've recently published a number of resources, and we have an ongoing programme of professional development around RSE, provided by not only our lead practitioners, but our external providers, Professor Renold from Cardiff University, who is providing a keynote presentation later on today, and Dr. McGeeney from the University of Sussex, to support schools with that, so that they can audit and map the current sort of situation in terms of RSE learning and teaching, and then think about the RSE code and how they can use that to start to think about what the learning might look like moving forward from rollout against the particular strands and learning within the RSE code.
In a report commissioned by Miriam Cates MP titled "What is being taught in relationships and sex education in our schools?", McGeeney and Renold are mentioned many times. The report states, in summary, sex-positive RSE seems to be characterised by the intention to deconstruct or transgress boundaries, some of which it is far from clear can safely be done without. And herein we see a dangerous blurring of lines between educating children to become wise to what is thought to be an inevitable early sexualization in the internet age, and educating them towards early sexualization for ideological reasons, which in turn compromises safeguarding. Likewise, the typically participatory and interactive aspects of sex-positive RSE also blur the lines between imparting suitable knowledge to children and engaging them in actively sexualizing dialogue on matters that should be beyond their experience or ability to project. This creates circumstances that are inherently indistinguishable from sexual harassment, therefore potentially putting children at risk from abuse masquerading as teaching, whilst also putting well-meaning teachers who are just following instructions at risk of accusations of abuse. And yet, sex positivity, with varying interpretations, is now a dominant vogue amongst some of the most influential RSE providers. Those parents concerned about the influence of queer theory on child relationships and sexuality education in Wales may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.